Good morning. This is Chair French convening the regular business meeting of the Kansas Corporation Commission for this Thursday, September 26th, joined by my colleagues Commissioner Keene and Commissioner Keither. On today's agenda, we have a pretty small agenda. We've got just 4 consent agenda items and we have 1 noticed item. We will begin with our consent agenda. Commissioners, you've had the opportunity to review all 4 items on our consent agenda. Let me ask at this time if you have any questions, beginning with Commissioner Keither
No, thank you.
and Commissioner Keene.
None for me either. I would move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, we've got a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Is there any further discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all in favor, please vote aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed, say no. The consent agenda is approved. We now move to our 1 noticed item. This is in docket number 24 GBEE 790 STG, and this is a proposed order on siting permit. Our presenter for this item is Mr. Brian Fedottin. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Commissioners. On May 31st, Grainbelt filed an application for a siting permit for 2 interrelated transmission lines and associated facilities as part of the previously approved alternating current or AC collector system. The first transmission line would be a double circuit 345 kV line of approximately 46 miles long across portions of Gray, Meade, and Ford counties, and known as the Meade Dodge City line. The second would be either a single or double circuit 345 kV line of approximately 16 miles long, going through Ford County, and we refer to that as the Buckland Dodge City line. To accommodate the transmission structures, Grainbelt seeks voluntary easements that are typically around 150 feet wide. On July 16th, the Commission granted intervention to the Boyds, who are landowners with the proposed Meade Dodge City line possibly crossing through their property. They propose an alternate route for a portion of the Meade Dodge City line. On July 3rd, Paul Owings, the Deputy Chief Engineer of the Utilities Division of the Commission staff, filed his direct testimony explaining that there are potential benefits of the project to Kansas customers or consumers, including reliability of electricity and future rate savings, and those benefits are sufficient to conclude the project is beneficial. The testimony also explained staff's belief that the transmission project is necessary and the route is reasonable, and therefore staff recommends the Commission conditionally approve the application. The testimony also explained that the Grainbelt project is a merchant transmission line, meaning that projects seeking to interconnect into the line rather than Kansas customers would be paying the costs of the project. On July 10th, the Commission held a public hearing in Dodge City, and on July 23rd, the presiding officer filed notice of filing of public comments, describing that the Commission received 13 written comments during the public comment period, which ran from May 31st to July 15th. In rebuttal testimony filed July 26, Grainbelt agreed to several conditions proposed by staff, including returning possession of any easement acquired by eminent domain if Grainbelt fails to execute an interconnection agreement or agreements with the generator within 5 years of receiving the easement rights. On August 7th, staff testified the original proposed route and Boyd alternative route and a Grainbelt alternative route all appear reasonable, and that the Commission should select the route with the least impact on property owners. On August 19th, the parties submitted their list of contested issues. In the list, staff, Grainbelt, and CMS agree that Grainbelt will file relevant feasibility, planning, and design studies required by SPP in a compliance filing with the commission, and Greenbelt's landowner protocols satisfy staff's recommendation that Greenbelt file a Kansas version of the landowner protocols that Greenbelt filed in Missouri. Also, as part of the joint list of disputed and resolved issues, staff and Greenbelt agreed that the commission should condition approval on several items, and I'm just going to name a couple of them for now. Greenbelt shall not install facilities on easement property in Kansas until it has executed an interconnection agreement or agreements. And as we discussed earlier, the condition that if they don't do that within 5 years, that any easement obtained through eminent domain would be returned to landowners within 60 days and without cost to the landowner. On August 23rd, Greenbelt and the Boyd submitted a joint motion to approve a settlement agreement, which requested that the commission condition the siting permit on deferring the question of whether the Boyd alternative 2 is reasonable until after the close of the current proceeding. And that would allow proper notice, a routing study, an additional public hearing. On August 26th, the commission held an evidentiary hearing on Greenbelt's application. At the evidentiary hearing, there were questions about the proposed preliminary national interest electric transmission corridor, NITSE, and it was clarified that the AC collector lines, for the most part, are not in the preliminary NITSE corridors, and the portions that are within the corridors are relatively de minimis. Staff is neutral on the proposed settlement agreement, but believes the AC collector system is necessary and that Greenbelt's proposed route is reasonable under the statute. But staff also acknowledged that Boyd Alternative 2 may be reasonable if given more time to study it. Pursuant to KSA 66.1,178A, before beginning site preparation or constructing an electric transmission line or exercising eminent domain, an electric utility must acquire a siting permit from the commission, and the commission shall decide the necessity for and the reasonableness of the location of the proposed line. And in doing that, the commission takes into consideration the benefit for both consumers in Kansas and consumers outside the state, as well as economic development benefits in Kansas. And the commission may condition a permit as it deems just and reasonable to best protect the rights of interested parties and the general public. Greenbelt advises that the transmission line will improve reliability and resiliency in Kansas during emergencies conditions because it would import power east to west and stabilize energy prices. Greenbelt even speculates that had this transmission line been in operation in 2021 during Winter Storm Uri, that it may have saved millions of dollars in costs to SPP participants. The order finds that based on the uncontroverted evidence in the record, the proposed transmission line would provide benefits to electric customers both inside and outside of Kansas and economic development benefits in Kansas, and therefore that the proposed transmission line is necessary. Greenbelt performed an extensive routing study that evaluated hundreds of potential routes to arrive at the proposed routes and incorporated information that it received through its public outreach process, which included open houses, direct mailings, and outreach to local and state officials. This order finds Greenbelt's routing study was comprehensive, the study area selection was reasonable, and the methodology used to select the routes was reasonable. The only dispute involving the reasonableness of the route concerns a roughly 5-mile stretch of the lines that run through the Boyd's property. The plain language of KSA 66.1,180 grants the commission broad authority to impose conditions on an approved siting permit if just and reasonable to best protect the rights of all interested parties in the general public. This order finds the settlement allows the commission additional time to obtain and consider all necessary information before selecting the location of the portion of the line crossing the Boyd's property. Therefore, this order goes in tight. Therefore, this order approves the joint motion to approve the settlement agreement. Since there's no dispute that the remainder of the proposed lines follows a reasonable route, this order finds the proposed routes for the Buckland Dodge City line and the Meade Dodge City line, subject to bifurcating for the Boyd alternative route, are reasonable. This order grants routing flexibility to microsite the proposed routes within 660 feet of the approved routing center line as necessary to minimize impact to landowners and address engineering and environmental constraints. Grainbelt explained in testimony that during construction, there may be temporary impacts to land covering the entire 150-foot right-of-way, but permanent impacts to the land will typically be limited to the actual structure footprint, which is closer to 6 to 12 feet, required access and vegetation clearing, and permanent access roads, if required, may be up to 16 feet wide. While not a formal commitment, the Commission expects Grainbelt to minimize its impact to the land consistent with that testimony. This order finds that the conditions outlined in both the joint list of disputed and resolved issues in the settlement agreement protect the rights of all interested parties in the general public. Accordingly, the Commission conditions its approval of Grainbelt's application upon the conditions agreed to in both the joint list of disputed and resolved issues and the settlement agreement. Grainbelt has agreed to staff's recommendation to file landowner protocols, and the Commission further conditions the siting permit on requiring Grainbelt to submit detailed Kansas-specific protocols governing its relationship with affected oil and gas lease production operators. After finding that the proposed line is necessary and the proposed routes subject to the bifurcation of the Boyd alternative are reasonable, one disputed issue remains: whether Grainbelt should pay for additional studies as requested by Sunflower, and whether Grainbelt should be financially responsible for any mitigative work recommended by those studies. The Commission recognizes there is an existing interconnection process at SPP. Here, the dispute centers around Sunflower's uncertainty that the SPP interconnection studies will be sufficiently scoped to identify potential negative impacts. Both utilities rejected a Commission suggestion to coordinate on study scopes. And while the parties said that the suggested compromise was unworkable, the Commission nonetheless strongly suggests Sunflower and Grainbelt work collaboratively to ensure Kansas customers are protected in the SPP interconnection study process. That said, the Commission will not impose additional studies or costs outside the existing SPP interconnection process. The Commission agrees with staff and Grainbelt that an additional power quality study would be duplicative and unnecessary. And as Mr. Rodriguez acknowledged, and he works for Grainbelt, under the SPP tariff, Grainbelt will pay for all necessary capital costs of the interconnection to the ITC Great Plains system, including any identified upgrades associated with the SPP analysis to ensure stable and reliable operations of the regional grid in Kansas. And the Commission believes that legally binding cost allocation requirement that legally binding cost allocation requirement is sufficient to protect Sunflower and its customers from costs related to reliability concerns resulting from the project. And the order has two maps attached to allow people to get a better idea of what's being approved and to see the disputed 5-mile stretch between the Boyds and Grainbelt. And I know it's hard to believe, but the order is far more detailed than that presentation. But with that, I'm available for questions.
Well, thank you, Brian, for that very comprehensive presentation. Well, at this time, I'll ask if there are any questions for Mr. Fedotin, beginning with Commissioner Keither.
Yes, I have one thing that I need refreshing on, Brian, concerning the easements, and if nothing happens, is it written anywhere that the land has to be restored to the way it was? Because they don't.
The land has to be restored. Yes, I mean that's a separate condition than the easements, but yes, they have to.
Okay. Okay, that was a question that I couldn't remember.
All right, Commissioner Keen, any questions?
Thank you, Chair French. I have no questions, but I do have a very brief comment, if I may. I think there's been some confusion about the applicability of the proposed National Interest Electric Transmission Corridor, the so-called NIETC, to the proposed siting docket before us this morning. And I'd just like to very briefly address that confusion, if I may. I share the concerns that I believe many have about some aspects of this proposed NIETC corridor, and in particular concerns about the width of the rights of way as proposed to be approximately 5 miles in width. The potential perspective and current impact and uncertainty that this aspect of this NIETC proposal may have on land use planning and sales or other conveyances of lands within this proposed, in my opinion, overbroad corridor width could be very consequential and adverse. I think it's important to keep in mind that the corridor designation and the proposed 5-mile right-of-way width are United States Department of Interior initiatives and not initiatives of the state of Kansas or the Kansas Corporation Commission. As noted within today's order, and I'm being a little bit repetitious, Brian, of your excellent overview, but I'm going to risk that. As noted within today's order and the docket before us, and as testified to by Paul Owings, the KCC Deputy Chief Engineer, these AC collector lines, for the most part, are not in the preliminary NIETC corridors, and the portions that are within the proposed NIETC corridors are relatively de minimis. Thank you, Chair French. Having said that, I would move approval of the order.
Okay.
We've got a motion and a second to approve the order as described in this docket. Is there any further discussion on that motion? If there is no discussion, I would just add a couple quick thoughts. I think the order is very well done, Brian, and I think it speaks for itself. The couple things I would say is line sighting dockets like this are my least favorite responsibility as a commissioner. It can be relatively straightforward sometimes to find that this large scale infrastructure is needed or is beneficial to the people of the state. It is not straightforward, and it is not easy to decide where to put that and to make all the trade-offs that come along with building large scale infrastructure. It's something we have to do, but it is not easy. It is complicated, and you never make everyone happy. It's part of the job, and I think we've done our responsibility here. The other thing I would say is I did want to make mention of the issue that Sunflower has raised in this proceeding regarding potential impacts on their distribution system. While we have not placed additional conditions, I think appropriately, on the siting permit, because there are other studies that are intended to address that, namely the interconnection studies that take place at the Southwest Power Pool. I do think that's a legitimate concern. I think it should be important to us, whether Sunflower's retail customers are jurisdictional to us or not. I think we should be concerned about what happens in their service territory. And I personally, as the representative to the Southwest Power Pool, will be closely watching the interconnection studies and the stakeholder process as it plays out at SPP. I hope that Sunflower and Grainbelt will both keep me abreast of the study process and um, any mitigation that might be needed that comes out of that. So I just want to make clear that us not adopting a condition there has nothing to do with a lack of concern. It is simply a fact that there is a process for that to be addressed, and we very much expect that that will be a comprehensive process at the Southwest Power Pool. So those are the only comments I have. I think the order speaks very well for itself. With that, we have a motion and a second. If there is no further discussion, all in favor of that motion, please vote aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say no. The order is approved. All right, that takes us to the conclusion of everything noticed on today's business meeting agenda. But at this time, I do want to look at moving into an executive session. So I will move that the commission enter into executive session not to exceed 45 minutes to discuss personnel matters of non-elected personnel pursuant to KSA 754319 to protect the privacy of the individuals involved. And I will further move that the following be included in that meeting. In addition to the commissioners, we would include Brian Fedotin, our general counsel, and Jared Harson, our human resources director. We are entering at 10:22, so we will return at, who's good at math? 11:07, is that right? 45 minutes.
Do you wish to
Sounds
have a
good.
second?
Oh yeah, do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please vote aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, we are entering executive session and we will reconvene at 11:07. All right, the commissioners have returned from executive session where no action was taken. But at this time, I will move that we extend the executive session for another 20 minutes, not to exceed another 20 minutes, again, to discuss personnel matters of non-elected personnel pursuant to KSA 754319 to protect the privacy of the individuals involved. And I will move that our general counsel, Brian Fedotin, be included in that extended session.
Second.
So I've got a second. All in favor, please vote aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, the commission will reconvene at 11:28. Sean, if you can send us the breakout room option again, that'd be great. Thank you. All right, the commission has returned from executive session, during which we took no action. And at this time, we are at the conclusion of everything noticed on our agenda. We've had our executive session. If there's nothing further to come before us this morning, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, please vote aye.
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 Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you all. Take
Thank you.
care.